Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. The dust is just now beginning to settle from the 2024 Mr. Olympia, but this weekend really turned things on their head. There's a ton to unpack this weekend and we have to try to make sense of all of it. The first thing I want to look at though is the top results of the open bodybuilding division. That's what the Mr. Olympia is after all. And this was close. If you take a look at the scorecard, we basically had a solid top two with a semi-close fourth and third tagging along in the callouts. But those two close competitors were Hadi Choopan, who won the title back in 2022, but this year he once again got second. And that means the other competitor, Samson Dauda, just narrowly won the 2024 Mr. Olympia. So that's who we're going to compare today. I would say I see less animosity towards Samson than I did for Derek last year, but I did and still do see a lot of comments saying like this could have gone either way, all the way up to comments like Hadi was robbed. So let me give you my full analysis of your 2024 Mr. Olympia top two. I know there was a top three call out at prejudging and a final four call out at the finals, but I'm not going to take a look at the full call outs. The main reason is because Derek was in third and he got straight thirds, meaning not a single judge that was scored on the score sheet had him in first, second, everyone had him in third. And that's a pretty clear distinction. So with that being the cutoff, I'm going to save Derek and everyone below him for other videos because I think there's an argument for him to be fourth and I want to do some other comparisons. And I also want to try to save some time on this video. So we're just going to take a look at this matchup that we've seen 3 times this year. We saw this matchup at the Arnold Ohio, the Arnold UK, and now the Big Dance. Here is Hadi Choopan versus Samson Dauda, and let's keep those questions in mind. Did Samson deserve this win or was Hadi Choopan once again robbed? If you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more Olympia Fallout coverage and discussions. We're going to start in the front double and let me lay out what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at as many angles as possible. For prejudging, I try to stick to photos from the actual call out, and then for finals, I mainly use photos of the routines because they were clearer, and if you want to go back and look at the scorecard, finals is where this contest was actually decided, so we need a closer look. And then for my second round of judging after the mandatories, we're going to take a look at the Gilco Productions footage. I am really trying to be unbiased here and include as many angles so everyone can get a fair shake. But anyway, in the first shot, I do see arguments for both, but I suppose most of the time I'm going to be going with Hadi. Samson is tall and has slightly better shape, but Hadi's really isn't bad and he has much better quality. Samson is bigger in the legs, but Hadi still wins here because he's much sharper. In the midsection, Samson and Hadi are kind of tied because Samson has a smaller waist and a slightly better V-taper when you include the lats, but his entire torso is a bit smooth. Hadi is much harder and drier. And Hadi's waist is really fine. He sports that half vacuum like Samson and it works. I'd actually have Hadi taking the lats even though he doesn't win the V-taper itself. The lats themselves are just bigger and wider proportionally. And finally in the arms, I'm not a big fan of either, but Hadi takes this. He's harder and has slightly better peaks. So as for scoring, these guys will get 2 sets of scores, one for finals and one from prejudging. And I'm using my regular system. I'm awarding 1 point to the winner if the pose is won narrowly, 2 points for a solid win, and 3 points for a blowout. For Hadi at prejudging, he's going to get 2 points here. I like Samson, the shape is there, but Hadi has okay shape too, but wins all the quality debates. He brings more reasons to win than Samson, so I do think this is a fairly solid win for Hadi. For finals, I do think Samson gets a better shake here because of the photo quality and the lighting. Now I'm just making this a 1-point win for Hadi. It's the same debate as before, just a little less resounding in the answer. Hadi wins the legs, his waist is tight like Samson, and he has the better arms. But Samson looks a bit tighter too, so I can really see this going either way now. But conditioning kills and Hadi's shape is good, so once again he brings similar things to Samson, but also things that Samson doesn't. Now maybe prejudging should have just been a 1-point win for Hadi too. Maybe Samson got hurt by the photo quality, but that's exactly why I included all these angles. Now, I have to go by what I see, and I do think that's okay to do because I have included so many angles. Anyway, Hadi will take a solid 2-point win at prejudging, but at finals, it's just going to be a 1-point win. The front lat is kind of hard to judge. The shadows are hiding Samson's lats and that obviously hurts the pose for him. But honestly, I wouldn't give him the pose anyway more than likely. It's not about the lats even. I don't like how Samson's stomach is a bit rounded. Hadi is much better here. So even if Samson had slightly better lats, it's kind of hard to look past that little pomp belly, which is a major criticism I saw from the fans regarding Samson. Hadi also has great elements like in the legs, which he straight up wins again, but also the lats are very good and he has a ton of shoulder width. But the jury is out here because we cannot get a direct comparison through the shoulders and lats. So overall, I think Hadi would probably win this pose anyway. Let's keep it at a 1-point win for now just because it's hard to examine Samson, and let's move on to see what we can see at finals. So I couldn't include a direct comparison of these two using photos from their routines because Hadi didn't hit it, but Samson needed another photo, and he did hit it. So I included the photo from his routine as well. And after seeing these first 2 shots, I think both guys got better at the finals. The consensus online seems to be that Hadi got better at finals, but what I'm seeing is that Samson improved as well. Now, even in the best photo against Hadi, it's hard to give Samson the pose, but it is definitely a lot closer. Hadi still wins the legs, but Samson is much sharper than he was before, and he's also winning the upper body extras. I failed to mention this last time, but he wins the delts, the arms, and and chest. And there's something else I want to mention. Hadi's delts are kind of a problem here. For me, not so much, and they're going to look worse at different points, but I bet some of the judges looked at those and gave this pose to Samson solely because of the delts. But I'm going to keep my score the same from prejudging for the same reasons. Samson has a slightly rounder stomach compared to Hadi, and Hadi legitimately has the wider lats. Samson has a great argument, but he didn't win the lats. So even though he picked up some of the other areas of the physique, I just don't think it's enough. But this is nothing more than a 1-point win for Hadi. And sure, there's absolutely a debate we can have if he should even be able to win at all because of the delts. I myself am very 50-50 on that. If I gave this to Samson, I would also just give him 1 point, so I don't think it will change too much, but right now Hadi's taking the point both at prejudging and finals. The side chest is definitely where some of us are going to really start disagreeing. Does Samson have the best chest in the world? Probably, yeah. Hadi's still winning the pose. And I was going to try and tiptoe around the fact that sure, Samson is big and he can win on just that or whatever, but full stop, I just don't see it. Samson is great, but some detail would go a long way. Hadi's side leg is much sharper and his cuts are more deeply etched. His midsection is more locked in. I wish Samson would remember to keep that thing in check. Hadi does and brings out more detail throughout his abdomen. Hadi's also bigger in the arm and delt as well and harder, but I will absolutely mention the issue here. Hadi's forward delt is lumpy and the far one is pointy. Does he still win the area? Technically, but go ahead and subtract it from his overall total because those delts are gross. But in the pec, Samson is so thick and so round, but again, where's the detail? Hadi doesn't have the most striations, you can only see faint ones, but he is more detailed here, like he is in every other area. But let's talk about Samson's silver lining. That's his overall size. His advantage is being 300 pounds and almost 6 foot. Well, Hadi has a lot of shoulder to shoulder width, he's also very thickly developed, and he hits this pose just right. He's short, he squats down, but he still looks stout. He is very filled in per square inch. Is Samson bigger overall? Yes, let's not discount that. He is impressive. And that's a big deal in this pose, it's all about looking thick. But Samson is a ball of mass, if you will, and missing the details. Hadi is more like a block of mass with more defined edges and corners, if that makes sense. With that detail advantage winning him a lot of body parts, with him looking very stout and filled in, and with him just being more detailed period, I have Hadi winning the pose with 1 point, and that's conservative. Now at finals, I do think these guys get closer, and I'm sure some of you will go with Samson because he's bigger. I get the appeal. I like his side chest more actually, but is it better? Once again, Hadi wins the side leg, but just by a hair. He was actually more cut and fuller at prejudging. Going up the midsection is still a solid win for Hadi. He also wins the arms and delts again, but also again, sus. And in the pecs, he's the only one with detail. Can Samson win the chest by just being bigger? Not in my opinion. I will say Hadi looks less impressive overall than at prejudging, and Samson looks a bit better as a whole. Hadi's missing that fullness and even some of the detail he had at prejudging. But let's give this one final look again from finals. I really want to make sure I'm not missing any of the detail that Samson might have brought. And like I said, I like his pose more, so I am a bit biased. But let's take a look at this angle. I'm glad I ended up taking a look here because I do think Samson does enough to win. He wins the side leg now, and we can now see some of that detail that was missing in the pecs if you look closely. Still, is Hadi more detailed overall? You bet ya. So honestly, I think the argument for Hadi is still there, but I kind of want to take what I saw between all 3 photos and represent it. The delts are fucking atrocious, and they need to have a say here. And I like Samson's pose, and Hadi is overall less impressive than he was at prejudging. And Samson got better at the finals. So at finals, I think since the argument for Hadi is at the weakest, and this pose was already pretty split, I'm going to split the scoring. Hadi will get a 1-point win for prejudging, but that point will be going to Samson at finals. Now we have the rear double, a very straightforward pose, but a pose that's going to surprise some people. For the longest time, Samson's back has been one of the biggest weak points, but he beats Hadi in that department here. But it wasn't just Samson getting better that won him the back. Hadi also dropped the ball here. He was not up to his usual standard of hardness this year as far as the back is concerned. His back looked a little bit smooth, and he didn't have the best back to begin with. Samson doesn't take big wins, but he wins the traps, upper back detail as a whole, the lats, and the lower back. And I know they're not big wins on their own, but he does best Hadi in all these areas, and when you combine them, that's kind of a major victory. It isn't exactly small. However, Hadi does get a small reprieve from winning the lower body. Again, he was not his normal self here, but he was still more conditioned than Samson. But honestly, Samson is really solid. He's finally getting some lines in the glutes, albeit very faint ones, especially in this lighting, but they're boxed in, which I think is the main thing judges want now, who knows? And his hamstrings are detailed enough. Honestly, I can't believe it, but this is actually one of the more decisive poses out there. Samson could win this by 1 point, and sure, I'd be happy, but I think it's too clear here. Hadi slipped up and Samson caught up. He has a much bigger back and the better back with a solid lower body. I'm giving Samson a very narrow 2-point win, but he does just enough to break into that 2-point realm. At finals, Hadi clearly did get a bit harder. The back is not as soft and smooth looking anymore, and the lower body is a few percent sharper. But when Samson gets a fair shake in the lighting department, it really shows us the gap here. Clearly, Hadi didn't just lose this because he was a bit soft. Samson actually has a better back at this point. And Samson got better at finals. I can't give him the full 3 points because again, Hadi's winning half the body. He's just a bit more conditioned downstairs and wins again. But this is pretty close to 3 points while still being a 2-point win. The win in the back is even more convincing now, and the lower body on Samson really isn't bad. He just doesn't win. win. If the legs took up anything less than half the body, this would be a 3-pointer right here. And maybe it still should be. Don't sleep on Samson in the rear double anymore. He just solidly took out an Arnold Classic champ and a former Mr. Olympia. In the second back pose, it gets much closer. Samson really did improve his entire back, and that includes the last pose and this one, the rear lat spread. But this was always Hadi's better pose. And I used a photo from someone in the audience because it was a bright photo, but the other ones ended up hurting who was ever on the edge. So first things first, both of these guys are pretty wide. At his peak width, however, I think Hadi may edge Samson out just slightly. However, Samson has the better lat insertion, so they look nice and full and they have that great shape top to bottom. And in terms of the thickness aspects, they trade off. Overall, Hadi has slightly thicker lats, I'd say, and wins the spinal erectors, but Samson is nipping at his heels there and wins the traps by a hair. But Hadi's making that really close. But what about the lower body? Here I have Hadi just slightly for better details and conditioning. So the back is extremely close. I kind of like Samson a bit more though. However, Hadi could win up here too, but he wins the lower body a bit more conclusively in my opinion. But I want to move on before I decide the score, and you'll see why. At finals, we get the same debate but another angle. The only changes that these two made are Hadi getting a little bit tighter in the back and in the lower body, and Samson is just a bit better overall. It's probably a combination of being fuller and tighter. Hadi was the more noticeably improved though. However, now I kind of want to switch my vote up. From this angle, Samson's lats just look better. You can really see how better his insertions are. I would still say Hadi is right there with him in terms of overall back development, and he may even have the better back. Hadi doesn't have the cleanest shape like Samson's back does, but he has the thicker, denser spinal columns as a whole, and once again the tighter lower body. I'm very split here, so once again I'm splitting the pose. But even though Hadi got better at finals, I'm actually giving finals to Samson. This is probably because of the angles, but again, I can't do too much speculating because then this would get messy. I liked Hadi more at prejudging and Samson better at finals, and that will reflect in the scores, as arbitrary as that is. Samson gets a small 1-point win here, but Hadi gets that point at prejudging. We're going to the last side pose now, and this is a pose Samson definitely improved. And honestly, Hadi has never been too good in the side tricep for traditional reasons. If he wins this pose, he's winning on the abs in the midsection. But he is not winning because he has really thick pecs and looks thick from the side. He doesn't even have a great tricep. Samson did always have these things, even when he was giving this pose up to Hadi. But now Samson is paying attention to the midsection, and the abs are bubbly and locked in. And then of course, he still keeps the upper body things intact. The important things like having much thicker pecs and a bigger tricep. Hadi does win the side leg, but the win isn't overwhelming. He is only winning because he's a bit sharper. The way I see it, I have Samson winning because he's streamlined enough now and he brings a decent set of abs at least, and his side leg is big, the pecs are round, and he has the better tricep between the two. Could I still go with Hadi? I mean, I guess, because he is more detailed and the midsection pulls a ton of weight, and I know a lot of fans are going to fall into that camp that just want a streamlined pose, which isn't a wrong standard to have for the shot. I would disagree for this pose though, but because we kind of have an apples and oranges thing, I'm only giving this to Samson by 1 point. We don't really get too much of a change at finals. I did include a better shot of Samson, and it's still a Samson shot for me. Hadi is a little sharper now though, which helps his main selling point being the abs. So honestly, I should probably just split this shot. And I think the best way to do that was just to have Hadi winning at finals, because he did get better at finals in the shot, and Samson is just kind of the same. But I really do think the shot is kind of 50-50. I want mass, other people want the shreds. I think it's close enough to give Samson the point at prejudging, but in order to represent both arguments, I'm going to give the finals version to Hadi. But now we have the abs and thighs, and there is no debate, and this will be the only 3-point win we have in this comparison. Let me give credit where it's due though. Samson improved this shot. His abs are popping a lot more, he has a little bit more stomach control, his vacuum was better. Overall, he improved most facets of the midsection, but he's just not Hadi. Now, Samson did a vacuum in this pic, so I included Hadi's vacuum along with what is the best abs and thighs pose in the world. If you want to compare apples to apples, Hadi beats Samson's vacuum, and apples to oranges, Hadi's abs pose is just straight up better than Samson's vacuum. Samson is just blurry and smooth. Samson is just blurry. The upper body looks smooth and the legs aren't that cut either. And that's before you even examine the abs development, and Hadi's advantage there, as well as his vacuum advantage, are clear. But here at finals, we can now compare abs to abs. Could I have included a better shot from Samson's routine? Yes. Does it matter? No. Hadi wins the thighs because he has more cuts and he schools Samson in the abs. Hadi has sharper obliques, a tighter, more controlled stomach, and the much better abs. This was a 3-pointer at prejudging, and it's the same here. The abs and thighs is still one pose that Hadi is lights out in. And finally, we've reached the last pose of the comparison. Honestly, you'd expect that Samson could finally take this pose from Hadi now. Samson was okay in condition, and he's bigger, so what's the problem? Well, it's still the same thing. You can't stand next to Hadi and not have superb detail. Samson is massive. Overall, he's going to get your attention. Luckily for Hadi, he is pretty muscular pound for pound, and he has the width up top to compensate a little bit. Sure, Samson does win on the size basis, but Hadi really isn't that far behind proportionally. But even though Samson is bigger than Hadi, Hadi still wins about every single body part. Who wins the legs. Samson might, but I'd have Hadi. He's just so much more cut. And this is the closest body part. Everything else after this, Hadi is winning. Midsection, no contest. Chest, also Hadi. The delts also have to go to Hadi too, even though they're sus. Samson's are just too soft and aren't as capped off and as big as Hadi's. I suppose Samson could take the arms though if you're including biceps, triceps, and forearms. Hadi's abrupt peaks and the skinny forearms throw me off here, so Samson could take this area, I guess. But with Samson looking smooth next to Hadi and losing so many body parts, he will not be taking this pose as a whole. I get it, he's bigger and that's the main thing I want, so Hadi's margin will not be big, but you still need the details. Hadi has a little less size, but bullies Samson in the detail department. Samson is lucky that he showed up on stage at 304 pounds, because that's going to make it just a 1-point win for Hadi. I know Hadi racks up a ton of wins when you examine the pieces of the physique, but next to Samson, you can't lie, Samson is dwarfing him, so the margin will be narrow. At finals, I say they both are a bit more detailed, so Hadi really just maintains the same margin in the detail aspects. Samson gets a better look here in the better lighting, but that doesn't magically bring out more details if you don't have them, and Samson doesn't have them. Hadi's winning all the same body parts as before, and Samson still looks smooth next to him. So Hadi will round out this comparison with a 1-point win on both nights for the most muscular. Now we're going to the overall physique categories. I'm going to average what I saw from every photo and this video that I now have on the screen and judge these guys on 4 categories: shape, flaws, conditioning, and muscularity. Let's start with the 2 easiest ones. Conditioning goes to Hadi and Samson takes muscularity. Firstly, I would say Hadi definitely had better quality to his muscles overall and was just straight up sharper from the front and side, and in the lower body from the rear. But at prejudging, that claim was a little shaky, and at no point was his back more defined than Samson's. That's legitimately one area Samson was more detailed in. So Hadi won most areas as far as conditioning was concerned, but not everything, so he's just getting a 2-point win. But Samson gets a 2-point win in his category. I think back at the Arnolds, I was making this like a 1-point win for Samson just because he was bigger. But now he's even bigger than he was, but now he's also more complete. With him bringing his back up to straight up beat Hadi there, he actually has more developed body parts as a whole, strictly from a size perspective. And of course, he's almost 6 foot and 304 pounds on stage. It's simple, he's just bigger. Hadi doesn't give up the size everywhere. I think he's just muscular enough and just complete enough to keep this at a 2-point win, so these guys are going to match each other in these first categories. But let's now go to shape. I really like Hadi's shape, I'll be honest. Is Samson's shape that much better? Samson did have a slightly rounded stomach at times, but his proportions are probably a bit better, a bit more exaggerated, and he had better flow to his physique. But really, go back and look at that front double. Hadi does not have the overly blocky shape anymore. He actually has a small waist, and he can do the vacuum thing too. I would say he has good flow to his physique. He has since the Arnolds, where he really brought that waist in. I still think Samson's shape is better, but not dramatically. It's more impressive because he's a bigger guy with shape, but Hadi has great shape too if you ask me. So I'm just giving Samson a 1-point win here. And finally, we have the flaws category. There are 2 flaws here, one on each guy. Samson's stomach control wasn't always perfect. Very good though from what we saw earlier this year. However, I cannot give this category to Hadi because his flaw was once again the sus delts. I said earlier that they don't bother me too much anymore. That's probably because I look at them like every week when I do a comparison with him, but the judges hate this. They made it clear that if you have something like this, you're going to get docked. The talking piece of the IFBB, Bob Ciccarello, said that's why Hadi lost the 2021 Mr. Olympia. And I noticed them way too much, and that was just in the photos. Imagine what the judges saw and thought. Are they a major flaw? I mean, define major. They take up a very small portion of the physique, and Samson isn't flawless, which does diminish his margin here, but sus delts are a big deal to the judges, even if they're a small deal on the physique. But I'm only going to make this a 1-point win for Samson. However, I almost forgot a flaw on Hadi. This was a last-minute inclusion, but Hadi has a pretty major imbalance between the quads. I know he's had this for a while, but I really never noticed it until this weekend. That hurts his symmetry, which is a flaw, and that's going to make this category a 2-pointer for Samson. And now it's time for the verdict. As you all know, I decide who lives and dies around here, so this is very important. In actuality, it doesn't matter. This is just one fan's opinion, but it is my opinion, and I know some of you hold that in regard. I wouldn't say high regard, but regard. Anyway, let me explain my scoring system a little bit further. As you know, we gave these guys a score of 1 to 3 in 4 categories and 8 mandatory poses. And in my system, I weight the scores in the mandatories round more than the overall physique categories round. You can still win without winning the mandatories, but they are the most important piece of this puzzle, so they're worth 2/3 of the final score, and the overall physique categories are worth 1/3. And in this comparison, we had 2 sets of scores in the mandatories, one for prejudging and one for finals. But here at the top, I wanted to keep it simple and just give you a final score. So for this final verdict, I averaged the 2 scores from prejudging and finals together, and that gives you our final scores, which had Hadi Choopan winning this comparison with 56.2 points to Samson's 43.8. But of course, let's unpack this. Do I think Hadi should have won? I mean, kind of, that's who I would have voted for, but I am more than happy that Samson won. This is not like last year where I thought Derek should not only have lost, but I disagreed entirely with that decision. decision. Here, not so much. So yes, I would have voted for Hadi if I was on that judging panel, but I completely understand why Samson won. And if we kept running the scenario, he would snag a couple of my votes for sure. So I really don't disagree much. Now, what happened on my scorecard? Honestly, you could probably throw that out at this point because this is very, very close. And I kind of want to get away from the scores because I've had enough of the numbers. Let's just review who I have winning more poses. The front double I'd give to Hadi, sharper and harder with great shape to close the gap to Samson. The front lat is close, it's a coin toss. The side chest is also a coin toss. The rear double is a Samson pose at this point, however. Then we have 2 more toss-ups in the rear lat spread and the side tricep. The abs and thighs is actually the easiest pose to determine, that fully goes to Hadi. And honestly, even though Samson is bigger, I'd still put the most muscular in Hadi's column more often than not. So out of 8 poses, 4 are really toss-ups, with 3 going to Hadi and 1 going to Samson. So out of those remaining poses, I could have them going either way. So let's keep that in mind. And who wins the overall physique categories? Well, that's Samson. Scoring aside, he wins 3 out of the 4 categories, and that was his main argument. Everywhere I look, everyone is saying the same thing, and I kind of agree with it. Samson had the best balance of everything, and that makes sense because he won the overall physique categories. In terms of completeness, now that Samson has a much better back than Hadi, Samson is a little more complete. In terms of muscularity, I think it's obvious. The 300-pound guy is the more muscular individual. In terms of flaws, Hadi was the more flawed individual. Samson had better flow, shape, and symmetry. The only thing he gave up was conditioning, and we saw at prejudging that Hadi was leaving a little to be desired in some areas compared to his usual self. So overall, that's Samson's argument to win. If the poses are close, if half of them are basically toss-ups, but if he's more well-rounded on more aspects, even if he leaves some important ones on the table like conditioning, why not go with a more well-rounded guy? And that makes so much sense to me. I made that argument back when Derek won. If the IFBB wants shape first and a well-rounded physique second, then Samson or Hadi should have won back in 2023. It's clear that the IFBB wants to move into that direction too. They want hashtag bodybuilding. They want shape first, and that's what this new era is all about, and I'm okay with that. Because Samson is just not shape anymore. He's legitimately a well-rounded bodybuilder with shape. But what about Hadi? Why did I have him winning? Well, I'm kind of an old school guy. To me, this was like a Dorian versus Flex moment, while I think the judges saw it as a Dorian versus Lee Haney situation. Basically, do you overlook the more shapely guy to go for the better bodybuilder in terms of conditioning and poses like in 1993? Well, that's usually the frame of mind I fall into. And no, I'm not really biased towards Hadi. I would say I'm definitely biased, but more towards that old mentality of judging, not a specific bodybuilder. And if you ended up pushing me on those poses, as I demonstrated throughout this comparison, I would have Hadi winning more, and his margins were bigger more often. And his conditioning was better. To me, he wins too many poses and is a little too conditioned to not get my vote. But that's honestly as of right now. If I see that the judging is going to move into this direction of mass with class, at the expense of winning a ton of poses and having better conditioning, I'll adjust my own system. I have no problem doing that. And that's actually the last point I want to touch on. I do think the judging criteria has officially changed. The judges have been looking to do this since 2018. When Sean Roden beat Phil Heath, the bodybuilding world changed. Bubble guts were out, mass with class was in. But between what happened with Sean and weak champions, the Olympia has been able to set their standard and firmly plant that flag. Until 2024. It's been years in the making, but I think the Olympia has finally found what they want. And like I said, this was a Flex versus Dorian situation for me. I had the Dorian, Hadi, beating the Flex, Samson. In 1993, both guys deserved to win that year, but for different reasons. But that decision was the single most important decision in bodybuilding history. That's why we continued to get mass monsters like Dorian winning 6 times, then Ronnie, then Jay, then Phil. But this decision was more like 1991 with Dorian and Lee Haney. And Samson and Hadi are the spiritual successors of that top 2 from 1991. I'm not saying they're Lee Haney or Dorian Yates, but they're similar because of what they represent now. Because Dorian and Lee represented the same thing back in the day. It was a crossroads, mass and conditioning versus shape. Back in 1991, the shape forward judging chose Lee, but it was close and he saw the writing on the wall. But just 2 years later in 1993, the decision was to go with Dorian Yates, and it ushered in basically 30 years where aesthetics took a back seat. Mass and conditioning reigned supreme for the longest time, but now I think we have a more even system. I think both guys could have won this. I think Hadi and Samson both deserve to, but this is a new era now. The new mass with class era, the return of aesthetics first. It's about everything now. Shape, conditioning, and size. And who better to embody that new standard than Samson Dauda, who had the best combination and the best physique on that stage. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. This was a really long one, but I had a lot to say mainly because this was so close and this was exciting. I really do believe we just entered a new era. I know I had Hadi winning, and I think he was the better bodybuilder, but Samson had the better physique. And that's what the judges want now, and I'm here for it. But let me know who you had winning down in the comments. Did you disagree with the winner, but see what the IFBB is trying to do like myself? And do you think Samson is going to win more titles? If so, how many? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you guys like these types of videos and want to see more, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. And if you guys want to support the channel even further and want to get your hands on some high quality supplements, then head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, use my code Project10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
that Lexi, yeah. Gotta get that Lexi, yeah.